Okay. Hello. I guess this is my first journal entry, or at least video journal entry. I was lying in bed for roughly an hour. I was just trying to get some sleep, trying to get to sleep. And I guess I stayed on my phone a little too long, and it just kind of. I saw a video. I actually saw a series of videos that kind of really just got me thinking. Um, Not necessarily about the state of humanity, but I guess a core concept of what it means to be human, which is to extend forgiveness to people or extend grace to people in a way that doesn't condone bad behavior, but is looking out for their best interest and like truly loving them. Not as in loving them to get something out of them, to prove some sort of moral superiority, but to truly want what's best for them regardless of the impact it has on you, right? Like I guess in like, the immediate financial, physical, social sense, really just from a spiritual sense of um, being able to extend forgiveness and not pass judgment on somebody who, although seems, regardless of their financial background, they could be multi-billionaire, or a child of a multi-billionaire who might not have grown up in a world where they had to fight for certain physiological needs, but could be lacking in a lot of ways, social, spiritual, um, loving needs that somebody who might have grown up with nothing maybe had received a lot of. You never know. And it's not to say there aren't really real, physiological inequalities in the world, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this journal entry. This journal entry is more specifically to focus on that spiritual aspect of humanity and um, what makes forgiveness, what makes grace so powerful, um, and kind of the dichotomy we have of the extremes, right? In at least the lens of like a physical graph, right? So on one end, we had people who grew up with a lot of privilege, quote unquote, right? And then a lot of people who didn't grow up with any privilege at all, right? And on one end, right, we see a lot of privilege, you know, whether that's like, a female in her appearance or a rich kid who was able to control people with his money versus somebody who grew up without a father in the streets, had no, figure to really guide them, and they turned into some sort of crack addict or joined a gang or something like that, right? Um, I think the number one most important thing to think about here is putting into context people's situations, right? As much empathy as you can show, you'll never be able to walk a mile in a man's shoes. And even if you put me, or not even just me, or any person in the exact same scenario, the exact same situation, the exact same nurturing um, path as any other individual, their lives will look completely different because we are each our own unique beings crafted in the image of God. Um, so yeah, you'll never truly be able to fully understand each other or like every single minute thing that somebody does, but the ability to work past those differences, right? And be able to focus on something that's greater than ourselves, greater than our feelings, greater than what has become so evident, the perception of our self-worth, right? Which is, I hate saying the word in this day and age because in this day and age isn't really specific. I don't believe in this day and age. I believe in the waves of good and the waves of evil, and then the microwaves that happen at to an infinite scale between those lengths of time, right? There is no relative good, there is no relative evil. It's just your turn, you know? It's just your turn. This is just our turn in life in the grand scheme of things. At least from a physiological perspective. The forces of nature that act upon our beings, right? Our impulses, our emotions, our feelings. The thoughts that really pop into our heads, right? And try to control our direction as humans. And we can't really control them, right? At least from a physiological perspective. We have to find other disciplines, other means, whether it's spiritual enlightenment, emotional transcendence, right? To really fight what the body wants and control it and form our complete being into something that's capable of withstanding those, negative forces of the world, right? Emotions themselves are neutral, and it's just the energy we put behind them that directs it. And I think um, right now there's a lot of emphasis on focusing our energy into the immediate physiological needs, right? And I think this can be explained in layman's terms, right? Just dopamine addiction, constant stimulation, and because of that, we have cut off access. We have caused those long-term receptors in our bodies to go dormant and be dominated by the short-term receptors. And in a lot of ways, those short-term receptors, although feels great in the moment, right, to do those certain things, whether it's through entertainment or through expressing an emotion in a certain way, they lack purpose, right, for a longer term goal of like your complete sense of self, your complete sense of being, and what you could be. What those nights that you're just by yourself in your room, deep in thought, looking up at the sky, looking up at the ceiling, and just thinking for however long, microanalyzing every single thing you did throughout the day. I could have done that better. I did this really great, but I really could have done that better. Being your own worst critic, right? I think, at least in my experience, that resonates truly well for me. But I think even just like the nature of that phrase is so common that I think it's safe to say it extends to every single individual, right? Or at least every single individual who has comprehended the English language in some way. That we ourselves are our own worst critics. Right now, this isn't really like a lecture. There's no really direction behind this, right? This is kind of just a raw dumping of my thoughts. So if this ever somehow gets uploaded to a channel, just wanted to point that out in case, like, I can understand my brain is confusing, and a lot of people's brains are, and this isn't really this isn't anything like specific. This is kind of just like therapy for me in a way to regulate my thoughts, and hopefully in that way, or by doing that action, right, I'll get better at conveying myself verbally out loud. And if eventually this, turns into something beyond just like my personal journal, I think that would be pretty cool because not only would that reassure me that I'm not alone in the way I think, but I think it will also just help bring truth, bring understanding to people as a whole. And that's kind of the bigger goal I want in life. That's just been lingering in the back of my mind for the past 5 or so years. Which is really to accept that although we can never perfectly understand each other, I think the most important thing we can do right now to balance this overwhelming focus on the individual, right? We hear terms like narcissism, um, selfishness tossed around. Everybody's about theirs. Everybody's got to get theirs. Everybody's got to be a certain status, have a certain fit, have a certain hair type, be a certain height, have a certain body shape, make a certain amount of money to be valuable. Um, Regardless, right? Um, and I think blaming first, well, excuse me. First, I want to just nip that in the bud. I think that's totally BS. Um, I'm not going to say I haven't fell into the practice of, or I haven't fell into the orbit of standardized society, right? Like I definitely do feel those pressures all the time, not only as an individual, but in my thoughts, the things that pop up and how I judge people immediately based off of appearance, right? Status, um, human interaction. But I think there's definitely a balance to it. Um, and that goes for both sides, right? Not only playing, you know, this is something I was guilty of too, and I notice a lot is people playing into this kind of moral high ground for trying to protect the layman, trying to protect the workers, the people who have to grind every day, work shifts. Maybe grew up in the not so greatest environments, and I think that's great. We should continue doing that. But I think there's also a lot of people on the other side, man. On the other side of that extreme, right? Like I said at the beginning, of where, yep, it's great to have empathy for poor people, but or people of like a certain status, on the outward side of things, compared to people who have, a good status. Like they're not allowed to have problems, right? They're not allowed to have emotional problems. I think it's important to put into context that they're human like everybody else. And the more we push people away through our own selfish needs, right? Whether that's fueling our ego through a moral superiority or thinking because somebody thinks differently than me that automatically disqualifies them as a human being rather than as a adversary, right? Um, and I think that's quite unfortunate. Like I'm a strong Christian, right? Well, I I'll, I'm trying to do my best to be a strong Christian, right? To be like Christ. But and obviously there's certain things, right, that I must sacrifice in order to commit to the words, to to commit to Jesus, right, and follow him. Um, but that doesn't mean I have to hate people of other religions that I can't get along with them, even if I fundamentally disagree with their approach to life, right, and their belief system. That doesn't mean I still can't be human to them. You know what I mean? I think that's really important. I think the best way you can influence somebody is leading by example and not by words. Um, and those examples, right, can appear in a multitude of ways. And unfortunately, right, humans are so bound to their state of nature that these can be seen as relative goods and evils, right? I volunteer at a soup kitchen, therefore I'm a good person. I actively hate Muslims online. That makes me a terrible person, right? And I think there's a lot more nuance not to the generality of the statement, right? I think generally those relative morals are very easy to be noticed by a majority of people, but those people are still individuals, right? Whether it's the person who hated Muslims online, the person who hated Christians online, the person who hated anybody online, the person who had committed hate crimes, and then the person who volunteered at the soup kitchen. Um, those people are not. Those people are still individuals at the end of the day. Um, yeah, I guess I got really sidetracked, didn't I? So this probably won't get uploaded. If it does, even right now, I'm just criticizing myself. I was like, yeah, you weren't very clear. I'm like, then I had to remind myself, and it's like, that wasn't the point. The point was for me to find clarity in my thoughts and have the courage to, if I do post this, to be ridiculed by people for not being clear, for not being the smartest person, for not making sense, but having the courage to post, you know, a much more true version of myself than I would normally be comfortable with doing. So yeah, I think regardless, if it's, for example, I'll just say this. Let's make an example. I think the best way to do this is make an example, right? I'm a Christian. There's a lot of Christians, I think. And one big theme for us, right, in our journey through Christ is to sacrifice our own personal judgments and give grace as Christ has given grace in many ways. He who has sinned may throw the first stone. Do not judge your own brother when there's a beaming eye, or there's a beam going straight through your eye, or a beam in your eye. Things of that nature. And that's not to say we don't judge sin. It's not to say we don't condemn bad behavior. But we're not here to judge individuals and place some sort of superiority to an individual based on the things that they've done or their status / outward appearance to society as a whole. So, as a Christian, we should not, in the same way that in our thoughts and in our words we honor the poor, and it is a very big thing for us to donate or give to the poor, support the poor, via volunteering, soup kitchens, funding the church to do outreach, charities, etc. That's only meeting people's physiological needs, right? At a surface level. It really comes down to the interactions you have with people. And I think, at charities, at drives, I think that's great. I think people do a great job at interacting and being truly human. I think I think my mic just cut out. That's okay. But anyways, to restate, I think people do a great job, or at least, soup kitchens, charities, volunteer work, right? They have a very great rep at not only providing for people's physiological needs, but treating people as human beings, empathizing, extending grace, extending spirituality, meeting people where they are. But I think where we really lack and where there's a lot of judgment is to those who may not be physiologically disadvantaged, or may be so physiologically privileged it's insane, grew up with money, never had to face violent scenarios in their life, never had to worry about paying bills. It's very easy for us to discredit them as humans. And I also think that's not right either. Um, that when I'm talking, pretty privilege, we're talking people who get involved in adult entertainment. We're talking rich kids who, you know, come across as very ignorant, but might have, underlying drug problems to cope with emotional avoidance, emotional detachment, and a lot of complex family dynamics that made them never feel like they were truly loved, they were truly seen, they were truly human. Right? Um, so as important as it is to support, to be charitable, to be chivalrous, to extend grace to people with physiological needs, I think the same goes for people who need that, the same for spiritual needs, for love, for patience, for understanding, right? Um, I hope whoever interpreted this, right, if this ever gets out, again, not sure. Um, Hopefully you didn't just listen to my words and that my outward vocal projection of my words didn't totally make my message, my intention unclear. I hope people are able to decipher my message and listen to that rather than just the words I've said. Um, and I hope the same for myself, and I pray that in time, the more I do this, right, the more I do this journal, I'll be able to more better communicate with conciseness and precision the things that not only make me understand my thoughts the best, but also are the most interpretable by any audience that decides to lend an ear and listen. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end the video there, or the journal. I guess I'm looking at myself on my other monitor now, and I'm just like, wow, I either one, need more sleep, or two, am really high, and it's definitely the prior. So, okay, good deal. I might just upload this and before I think too hard about it. But cool. I'll see you if I see you.